Good evening. Welcome to Asia Society Hong Kong Center. It's my great pleasure as president of ASHK to welcome all of you to tonight's talk. I'm personally looking forward to this talk because I'm fascinated by this scientist. I think some of you know, I worked in New York before coming back to Hong Kong, and one of the organizations I worked for was called Committee of 100, founded in 1990, a group of prominent Chinese Americans, people like I.M. Pei and Yo-Yo Ma. And at Committee 100, when I was there 2003 till 2009, I knew one of our founders, besides Yo-Yo and I.M., was also Madame Wu Jianxiong. And although I never met her in person, she died in 1997, I knew she was one of the founder of Committee of 100 because she was living in New York at the time, a very prominent Chinese-American scientist. So I've been fascinated with this woman, but not knowing that much about her because it wasn't taught I grew up in the States and definitely was not taught in the history books. And also later on, after Committee 100, I went on to work for the Museum of Chinese in America. And we would have tiles of famous Chinese American, and we had a Wu Jianxiong tile. So I knew she was prominent, and this was before Google, so I really couldn't do that much research about who she was. I just knew she was a famous scientist. And later on, as I did more research on her and with the help of Google and others, is just, she is a phenomenal woman. And but how come I didn't know that much about her? So I know some of you in the audience, also like me, did not know that much about her. And that's why I'm so glad to see so many young people here with us tonight for tonight's program. It's people like her that is part of our history. And as a Chinese American, and also Madame Wu was also a Chinese American, her contribution in the scientific community, I've seen Oppenheimer recently, and she wasn't in the movie. And I often think, if somebody was to make a biopic, I would want to see a biopic of her, about her, because it's, her story is fascinating. The other night on TV, they were showing the movie Hidden Figures about the African-American mathematicians who help in the project with the moon, with the space project, American Space Project. And again, Hidden Figures, there's a double entendre there, Hidden Figures. And again, she's one of our hidden figures. And her story is, I know tonight, I'm so delighted. I only met Ian 3 months ago at a Princeton in Asia event, and we started talking about some of our history, a history of that we weren't taught. And so from there, we were able to convince Ian, who is from Hong Kong, who is here in Hong Kong, to give us this lecture. And really, another reason for this talk is those of you who have not had a chance to see our Huen show in the Chantal Miller Gallery, I highly recommend it. So we have built this as part of our project because, again, unlike Huen, again, unknown. And they're they're kind of contemporary. I think they're born 12 years apart. And they also started in parts of China in really in the same province, right, in the same area. And they went on, left China, pursue their careers. One is in the arts and one is in the science, and really achieve great fame in their careers. So tonight, this is part of our Huen program. And so tonight we're going to introduce you to a really fascinating woman, and I'm really delighted that Ian, who is somebody who has a really interesting career, and I'll mention briefly, he is a graduate of Princeton and also a CFA charter holder, and he's also a Master of Arts in Comparative and Public History at Chinese University of Hong Kong. I think he writes frequently here in Hong Kong. I know Yazhou Zhoukan and others. And he's also has a degree from a Master of Public Administration from Tsinghua University. And starting this September, he's going to pursue a PhD at the Oxford, I think, Doctor of Philosophy degree in Asian and Middle Eastern Studies at University of Oxford. So he's kind of like me. I mean, he's curious, always interested in learning, interesting, just not just in his field. So that's why we're really delighted. Ian is one of our own here in Hong Kong, and he has agreed to give us this talk about a woman that we're going to, by the time this talk is over, we're going to know more about her. I did look her up just briefly today on Google, on Wikipedia, to know her birth dates. And her Wikipedia page is quite long. So in this 1 hour, I know Ian's going to give us a lot of really interesting stories about her. And so, you know, I hope many of you will have, especially the young ones, have some questions for Ian afterward. And I'm hope to, in the future, have Ian back to have more talks like this. I think we really need to understand more about a contribution of figures like Wu Jianxiong, because I think without knowing our history, you know, there's so much conflict right now. And some of the stuff that she faced, and she kind of reminds me of Jianxiong a little bit. Those of you who know about Professor Jianxiong, who did go back to China and became the father of China's rocketry program. And what we're seeing right now in the United States, and many of the scientists, people in the STEM returning, and also in today's newspaper, Hong Kong U president said Hong Kong's going to benefit from some of the brain drains coming, the scientists leaving the U.S. Again, seeing history kind of repeating itself. And I hope we do learn from some of the mistakes that we made in the past and really learn from figures like her. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Ian to get our program started. Enjoy today's program. Thank you.
Thank you, Alice. Thank you, everyone, for coming. So today I'll talk a little bit about Wu Jianxiong. Wu Jianxiong, I also looked up a little bit about the Wikipedia page before talking today. She's very, very interesting. So she was born in 1912, the year when the Qing Emperor Puyi abdicated. So she was born in the year where Imperial China ended. 1912. And actually, the ending of Imperial China is basically first degree related to her and her family. And then she died in 1907 when I went to Princeton, and also when Hong Kong was returned to China. So which marked kind of the end of the century of humiliation. So if you look at the birth dates, the bookends of her life, it's really going from traditional China to the end of humiliation to what is now like modern and a strong China. And she is like the quintessential woman in STEM. And what she did in the past decades during her physics career really transformed the world. So today, actually, I'll talk a bit about her life, but it's actually more than that. I want to go a bit more into basically how she embodies from her own family and the family that she married to, and how those two forces basically, with her as an embodiment of the bridge between classical China to the world today. Not just China today, but the world today. So I will, without further ado, because there's a lot of stuff to go through. So just a little bit about Wu Jianxiong. Wu Jianxiong, she was born in 1912 in the province in Jiangsu, in what is now Taicang. So a very important place, a very important thing about her background, 1912. It was the beginning, the first year of the Republic of China. Her parents were actually academics. Her dad actually founded Mingde public school that she went to. And so she, like a lot of like great scientists, her background was completely different. So when other people might just be playing with, toys or whatever, what her dad did was he actually recited to her or read to her scientific journals before she could read. And then she started reading. So her parents were very much into education, not just for the boys, but also for women. And now that is actually quite amazing because even though the Empress Dowager ended foot binding in 1901 after the Boxer Rebellion, but the foot binding actually lasted in many, many villages up until the 1920s or even 30s. So that's why you can still see old women with foot binding. And you're like, that doesn't make sense because you're not 160 years old. How come that happens? It's because people persisted with that tradition. But where she came from and what her parents represented was actually a very progressive form of education where not only her brothers had a strong education, but so did she. And she was obviously a very, very smart girl. She went to high school. Her parents could have afforded it because her parents came from a relatively wealthy academic family, but she chose to do a scholarship, and she came 9 out of 10,000. I don't know what the other 1 to 8 did, but she was only number 9. So, but absolutely amazing. She then went into she got into the Central National University, which is now Nanjing University, and at the time was actually the capital city. And by going in there, because of the scholarship, she actually had to be a teacher, and she actually studied to teach in that school. And the school was actually run by Hu Xi. So she actually met with Hu Shi, and actually Hu Shi was actually her second father. So they actually maintained a very lifelong relationship, and that's part of the reason why she thrived in America as well. She went to university. She first did maths and physics, and then but it was in early 1930s. So as you know, the Japanese already took over Manchuria in 1931. And then from 1931 to 1937, when the Japanese invaded the rest of China, those years were actually marked by a lot of student movements about wanting Chiang Kai-shek, the leader of the Kuomintang at the time, to actually be much harder on the Japanese in terms of defending our country. And Wu Jianxiong was actually part of the student body that was really adamant, and she actually even met with Chiang Kai-shek. Little did she know that she was actually you probably say the Chinese person, not just woman, the Chinese person that played the most important role in ending the war with the Japanese, in winning against the Japanese. Okay, and so she graduated with flying colors. She met with her mentor, who did her very early on. A Chinese woman did her PhD in the University of Michigan. So she was actually going to go to Michigan in 1936. And so she boarded with a friend of hers, and then she said goodbye to her parents. That would also sadly be the last time that she saw her parents. She went to America. She went to Berkeley, and then at Berkeley she met her future husband, Luke Yuan. So remember this last name, Luke Yuan, is going to be very important. And then in Berkeley, she realized that, if you go to Michigan, there'd be a lot of discrimination. So women were not allowed to go through the front door. And so she would rather stay in a relatively liberal environment of Berkeley. So through her, boyfriend at the time, she got into one of the labs in Berkeley run by Ernst Lawrence, who eventually got the Nobel Prize in 1936. And they worked together with Oppenheimer in terms of the radiation lab. She did her PhD, and then in beta decay, so in radioactivity, but it wasn't easy. She wasn't, even though with her credentials, she was only allowed to be a postdoc, and then she did go to Smith just to teach. And it wasn't until Lawrence that wrote a few letters that she went to Princeton to teach naval officers. So again, a bit of cross-pathing with her and Princeton. And then eventually she went, she was at Princeton, and then it was during the Second World War, and then during the Manhattan Project. So this is where the interesting part is. During the Manhattan Project, there was the Fermi lab. They were doing uranium enrichment, and there was this one experiment they just couldn't get past. They couldn't get past. And Fermi's partner, Sergei, who was her supervisor, thought about her. And it was like, why don't you talk to Miss Wu about this? And so her thesis, actually, the council also included Oppenheimer. So they realized that her thesis was able to solve that thing that was actually blocking the Manhattan Project from uranium enrichment. So it was actually her work that actually allowed the Manhattan Project to be successful. And then obviously that ended the war against Japan. So if anything, just objectively speaking, she was the most important Chinese person in terms of winning against the Japanese in World War II. She then had a tenure. She then had a tenure position at Columbia. She stayed at Columbia, so that would be most of her life. And then another part would be, again, something very famous is 1956. There were two Chinese-American physicists, 这个李政道 and Yang Zhenning, and if there's anybody who does physics here, I'm sorry, I'm going to be murdering physics, but I'll do my best. So they have something called the parity, where when something that's radioactive, as it decays, the particles should be emitting at all directions, just randomly. So that would be called the parity. But then these two Chinese American physicists were thinking that's not the case. And so they needed an experiment done in order to see if their theory was correct. And the person that they were thinking of was a Colombian colleague, also a fellow Chinese person, Professor Wu. And so they went to Professor Wu, and it was Professor Wu who actually did the experiment with the cobalt 60. And she found that the direction of the particles decaying wasn't random, but it went in a specific direction, proving them right. So in 1957, Li Zhengdao and Yang Zhenling actually got the Nobel Prize, but she didn't. Until 1966, there were 7 times that she was nominated. She didn't get it. There were a lot of physics Nobel Prize winners that said this is the biggest mistake ever. She wasn't really recognized until 1978 when she got the Wolf Prize. And so I guess another thing is she was actually persistently underpaid. It wasn't until much later in her career that her pay was actually go back to what is like a male colleague. And she she actually did not go back to China until 1973 when the US and Chinese relations normalized. And when normalized, she went back, but her parents were dead already, and so she could only meet her relatives. She continued to be a champion for both science and also for women. I mean, she famously said in MIT in 1964, molecules and DNA, they don't care about the gender of the person observing, so why should we be? So she has always been a champion. She was a champion in actually advancing science under President Ford, and eventually she died in 1997, and which is the year when Hong Kong was returned to China. And her last wish was actually to go back to China. So she was actually buried back in Mingde School where her father founded and where she went to school. So that's kind of a brief story about her. What I actually want to do is actually, she embodies, she obviously, as part of a very instrumental part of the Manhattan Project, she really shaped the modern world. But what's interesting is what shaped her. And this is where the next two sections are, which is, if you look at her, she was actually, Taicang wasn't a random place. She was born in the epicenter of the imperial examination bureaucratic power complex that shaped Chinese history since 604 AD, okay? And she married into the family that signified the end of the imperial era, okay? So these two forces, you can think of her as really where she came from, who she married. Obviously, that doesn't diminish what she did just as a person, but what's very interesting is that the two main historical forces were actually embodied in her as a person. So let's talk about where she came from and the epicenter of the imperial examination system. So this is basically what I want to go through, which is her traditional roots that shaped her scientific career, and her scientific career eventually led to a huge global impact, both in terms of the atomic bomb and the Nobel Prize by Professor Li and Professor Yang. So it's just to have a brief, this is the brief outline of Chinese dynasties. And so China, unlike many different cultures, basically it's like the only country where very early on, we didn't have a noble system where birth basically you determined your rank in government. But we had an imperial examination system that happened in Sui dynasty about 700 AD. So in the Sui dynasty and then the Tang dynasty up to about 1000 AD, that system was parallel with the noble birth system, but really came from the Song dynasty when 1000 AD to 1200 AD, where the imperial examination system became very important. And from the Ming and Qing, which is from 1638 to 1905, this system basically dominated how government was run. So if you look at this would be like where the people would take exams, and would be like one of the examination papers. So just very briefly, so it's basically a national system where you first do well in your own town, and then your province, and then your national system. And everyone is open to taking exams, but then usually only very, very few families would be persistent. So it's actually another way of weeding out the peasants or the lower class from the nobility, because only the nobility actually had books. But relative to like the pure noble system, not only do you have to come from a noble system, but you also need to study hard as well. So in some sense, it's much fairer. In general, there are very, very few poor people that were able to be successful in the examination system because you need books at home. So, and this is the area where it was most powerful in the Ming and Qing, which is where Wu Jianxiong came from. So there's a term called 书香门第, which is your family, that your family actually has the beautiful smell of books because it's a form of wealth. Only wealthy people could afford books at the time. And so this would be one of those examination booths. So because they had to make sure there's no one cheating in the exam, you are not allowed to leave there for 3 days. So you eat and you do everything there, like literally every day. So cholera was actually one of the biggest things that happened in the imperial examination system. So the key thing, not only do you have to do well, you also have to survive it. So just a side note, very interesting, 同仁堂, everybody knows. This is like marketing to the best. What they did was during the imperial examination system, at every single important port, they would actually have people giving out for 止屙丸, for basically to stop diarrhea. And so everyone that eventually became a prime minister or whatever, having come from the system, would have actually then thank the company that helped him to go through the 3 days of the ordeal. And so 同仁堂, so you can see how this whole imperial examination system with the bureaucracy creates this gigantic political economic cycle in Chinese society. And so if you look at where Wu Jianxiong came from, she came from here, Taicang. It's right here. So right next to Suzhou, this is Shanghai. Taicang. When I read some, especially the more of the international or Western or English materials, they would say she came from a small fishing village of China and then rose to that. That is absolutely not the case. This is, yes, a very small place. You look at these, just Suzhou, Taicang, and Changzhou. These are very small places. This is the whole of China. Broadly speaking, this is about like the Qing dynasty looks like as well. So it's just right here. That's where she came from. By the way, Taicang, somebody else came from there too. Stephen Chu, the Nobel Prize laureate. Again, not random. Because if you look at this, this is basically the number of imperial scholars. So this is the ranking, the historical ranking of imperial scholars. And you can see Suzhou came number 1 at 3,600. Okay, and then Hangzhou, and then all the way, and then there's Jiangsu, and then there's Fuzhou, and then there's Jiangxi. So these are the powerhouses of your imperial examination system. This is the imperial examination champions. And you can see, by far, Suzhou had the most at 54. And then if you look at national, just the Qing dynasty, you can see the national, there were about 26,700 imperial scholars, 进士. And then Jiangsu was 2,933, so it came about 11%. And 70% actually clustered in these two towns. So we're talking about, and then that population, if you look at like pre-Taiping rebellion, so before 1850, you could talk about 9 million or so. So at that point in time, China had about 400 million people. So we talk about 2% or so. And then afterwards, the number of population actually went down about 70 to 80%, which is typical for a lot of Jiangnan towns. But basically, you're talking about a 2% population representing about 11% of all the imperial scholars. But if you look at the imperial examination champions, Jiangsu 49 clustered mostly here when the number of national zhuangyuans was at 114. So we talk about 43%. If 70% or 43, we talk about a third of the imperial examination champions actually came from those two small towns. And that's where Wu Jianxiong came from. And that's why she was able to have education, being born in 1912. And that's why she was born into a family where education mattered, because that's what Jiangsu, southern Jiangsu was about. That's where those two towns were about. That's why if you look at it, in 1919, during the May 4th movement, slightly less than 10% of males were literate. Because not only do you have to know traditional characters, you also have to know Wenyan in classical Chinese. The revolution of, or the evolution from traditional from classical Chinese to modern Chinese brought the literacy level to about 20% in 1949, and it wasn't until simplified characters that pushed the literacy rate up to about 60-something% by 1966. So we're talking about a girl born in 1912 where the literacy rate was, for males, adult males, was less than 10% or even about 8% or so, and she had the opportunity to study. So the tradition of this studying and the importance of academics was really rampant in the area that she came from. One funny, and also another thing is very important, that is, it clustered around Jiangsu, not just because they were smarter, but because there was another rich area that actually underperformed systemically, and that's in Guangdong, so where we are. And the reason for that is because basically Northerners they don't like Cantonese people. So, for example, he was supposed to be the last imperial champion, 状元, 朱汝珍. So he eventually taught in Hong Kong U, in Chinese. So, and then if you go to, only for visiting, hopefully you don't have to go. This is in the sanatorium at the hall. 人心康在，人心康治. 朱汝珍 wrote that. So if you go there, you can actually see his calligraphy. Now the problem was, in 1904, he was supposed to be the last imperial champion, examination champion, but he was taken out by the Empress Dowager, allegedly, because he was from Canton, and the Empress Dowager hated Cantonese people because she looked back at her life. Kang Youwei, Liang Qichao, the people that started the 1898 reform, these people that actually wanted my nephew Guangxu to kill me, Guangdong, so no good. And then another thing is his name had the word Zhen in it, and Zhen is Empress Dowager's least favorite person because these are the three wives. This is the Empress and the two concubines of Guangxu. That's why he died early, maybe. But so she was the niece of the Empress Dowager. They were sisters, and Guangxu, for relatively obvious reasons, don't like either of them and preferred her. And she's Zhen Fei, and she actually hit the bottom, like she actually violated a lot of the red lines of the Empress Dowager. Not what people think about the like pushing Guangxu for reform. The Empress Dowager didn't care about that. What she cared about was she started selling government positions for cash, and the Empress Dowager was like, "This is my monopoly. You don't touch that market." Okay, so she was ostracized. If you go to the Forbidden City, this is the Zhenfei Well, where when the Boxer Rebellion and the foreign forces invaded Beijing, they were running, and the night that they ran, Empress Dowager ordered her to thrown into this well. There's absolutely no way that she could fit in here. This is it was built later. This size is built later. So you can see. Part of it is really about the clustering of the imperial examination scholars, the scholars coming from actually political forces. Because if you go one down, he is the 1894 imperial examination champion. He's from the same area, from Tongzhou, and he didn't become the champion until 1945. And the reason was because his mentor, Weng Tonghe, was the prime minister and also the teacher of Emperor Tongzhi and Guangxu. And so he basically, he couldn't just make him the champion, but he actually did a lot of things to smoothen the process to allow him to do so. Okay, so you can see that. And this is 1912. 1912 is the year that the end of the Qing dynasty. This is Emperor Longyu, so it's her later. So this is her. So after Guangxu and the Empress Dowager died the same night in 1908, and then she became the effective highest ruler of the Qing dynasty because Pu Yi was only 3 at the time. So 3 years later, he was 6, and she was the one in charge. Ironically, it was him, the imperial scholar, the champion that actually wrote the abdication edict. He wrote it, and then she signed on February 12, 1912. Now, what's interesting is what forced the Qing dynasty to abdicate. Obviously, it was the 1911 October 10th revolution, allegedly led by Sun Yat-sen. And then the person that actually held the forces, the Beiyang forces, refused to help the Qing dynasty, and then forced the Qing dynasty to abdicate instead. And the person that was in charge of the Beiyang is this guy, Yuan Shikai. Yuan Shikai, the president, he's also the great-grandfather-in-law of Wu Jianxiong. So this is where it's significant. So that's why Wu Jianxiong's husband was Luke Yuan. So Luke Yuan is the grandson of Yuan Shikai, who was the first and main warlord that controlled the most powerful military force at the time. He also, with the blessing of Jordan, as in Jordan Road Jordan, who was the ambassador of the British Empire to Beijing at the time, he had his blessing, and that's why Yuan Shikai was able to force the abdication of the Qing regime, and then he became the president of China. Okay, and this is all linked to why Luke Yuan eventually actually ended up in America with Wu Jianxiong. And so this is kind of the line chart. So if you look at Yuan Shikai is here. Yuan Kewen would be the father-in-law of Wu Jianxiong, and then Luke Yuan is Yuan Jialiu. So this is kind of the bloodline. So what's interesting is that actually Luke Yuan's father is half Korean. So the kids, the descendants of Wu Jianxiong, they're actually part Korean as well. It's because Luke Yuan's grandfather, Yuan Shikai, we'll talk a little bit about Yuan Shikai, very, very interesting, very important person in Chinese history, in modern Chinese history. So Korea has always been a vassal state of China, especially after the Ming Dynasty, and then they were diehard loyalists to the Ming. But then when the Ming became too weak, the Qing at the time, they hadn't taken over the rest of China yet, actually beaten the Koreans to submission. And so since 1636 or so, Korea was actually a vassal state of the Qing, even before the Qing took over the rest of China. And so for so since then, there would always be like an envoy, like a supreme emperor that comes from the Qing dynasty. And the person there in the 1880s was actually Yuan Shikai, the great-grandfather-in-law. And the reason is because actually Yuan Shikai also comes from a very interesting background. His grand-uncle was an official of the first rank, so prime minister level. His uncle that became his nominal father because he was adopted. His adopted father actually worked under the viceroy of Liangjiang, and so he was actually a very prominent person as well. So he came from a very prominent family. So he was actually Yuan Shikai was actually recommended to join the army brigade that was under the Huaijun, under Li Hongzhang, the main modernizer of China. And one of the main purpose or one of the main tasks they have to do is to maintain Korea. So he did. He actually averted the 1882, 1884 Japanese invasion or attempt to create some kind of political turmoil and coup d'état in Japan. He actually beat the Japanese in the 1884 rebellion in Seoul, and then in 1890, which is when Wu Jianxiong's father-in-law was born, he was actually born in Korea because Yuan Shikai had a concubine in Korea, and she was actually Yuan Kewen, as in the father-in-law. Yuan Kewen's mother actually is the younger sister of the most favored concubine of the king of Korea at the time, and then then she was kind of forced to marry Yuan Shikai. And Yuan Shikai had Yuan Kehuen in Korea. So Yuan Kehuen, the father-in-law, was actually born in Korea. Then the Japanese invaded in 1894. The Chinese lost in the Sino-Japanese War, and then so went back to China. And then 1911, Xinhai Revolution. At that point in time already, Yuan Shikai was actually the most powerful warlord, lording over what was the Beiyang army. So it was Yuan Shikai's Beiyang army. And so because the Qing court wanted Yuan Shikai to put down the rebellion, but he refused, and instead actually forced the abdication of the Qing emperor, and hence he became the prime minister, the president of the Republic of China in 1912. And then so you see, Yuan Shikai had many sons, but his eldest son is Yuan Keding. So, and then his second son is Yuan Kehuen, the second son of Yuan Shikai, father-in-law of Wu Jianxiong. And he had an absolutely fascinating life. He's basically the Leonardo da Vinci opium addict version. And what's very interesting is he was like the philanderer. He had a perfect memory. He was like so talented in the classics. He was talented in calligraphy, and then he was talented in poetry, and he was talented in he collected books, and then he basically it only takes him about once to read everything, and he will remember by heart. But he was also absolutely not interested in politics. He was only interested in opium and poetry, and also kunqu. So like the singing actually, and so actually maybe not random. The Chinese opera where Wu Jianxiong came from. So I don't know, maybe that had an influence on the son. And he was, even though he was the son of the Korean concubine. Actually Yuan Shikai had his main wife Chen Shi, Chen Shi to take care of him, and then basically she completely spoiled him. He was also a philanderer. There's one time he actually went to Jiangsu to do some work, and then so this is one of the saddest stories that happened to Yuan Kehuen. And so he fell in love with this geisha, and then he came back. And then Yuan Shikai was like, how did that go? And apparently he had a photo of her, and she dropped on the floor. And the dad asked him, so who is this? And so he couldn't say that, I really like her. I wanted to have her as a concubine. And so what happened was he was like, oh, actually, I saw someone who was very beautiful. I was going to recommend to you. So it went from his love interest to his stepmother. So this is one of the saddest stories that actually happened to the guy. But I think he did okay. But then what happened was throughout the years, Yuan Shikai, by the end of 1915, he actually wanted to be emperor. So that's actually going to be one of the most disgraced thing that Yuan Shikai did. So Yuan Shikai now is a horrible character in Chinese history, and the main thing is because he wanted to be emperor. And what's very interesting is Yuan Kehuen actually was against it, and to the point that there's this he actually went to walk around the Lake Kunming in late 1915 when his father wanted to be emperor, and he wrote these two lines. 絕年高處多風雨，莫到瓊樓最上層. I roughly translate to beware of the extreme weather at high altitudes. Do not try to rise to the top of the heavens. So, and then because his older brother really hated him, because his older brother actually his leg he actually had a riding accident. So one of his legs actually he's a crippled guy. And so in general back in the ancient times, if you are crippled or if you have some kind of deformity, you can't be emperor. So that happened. So for example, Yuan Guifei's the Tang Xuanzong, the reason why the first crown prince couldn't be was because he was blind to one eye or something like that. And so the eldest brother was also always scared that the talented younger brother might take over him. And he actually vowed that if you try to take, I'll kill you. And so Yuan Kehuen was very similar to Cao Zhi did to Chou Zek. the guy who talked about the rivalry of siblings and talked about the poet and wrote that poem in 7 steps, 七步成詩. So very similar, very personality-wise, very similar. So Yuan Kewen has always tried to stay away from all that action. But that poem actually went to Yuan Shikai, and Yuan Shikai threw him into house arrest then. And Yuan Shikai was only emperor for 83 days. And so he was actually during the house arrest time that he was at that actually this whole ordeal happened. So he was never part of the action. What is actually relatively sad is the day that he actually went to the Kunming was with one of his concubines, actually the mother of Lu Yuan. And the mother of Lu Yuan was actually very much despised his love for poetry and like calligraphy and culture and all that. So she actually left him when Lu Yuan was only 3. So Lu Yuan grew up without a mother. So afterwards, Yuan Shikai died. Yuan Shikai died very briefly after he was emperor for 83 days. He then knew that nobody wanted him to be emperor. Now, what's very interesting is, so when he wanted to be emperor, there were a lot of very young and educated people that were against him. One of the most ardent person that was against people that were against him was Wu Jianxiong's father. So in Suzhou and in that area, there were very learned people that were against Yuan Shikai. And so that's actually what Wu Jianxiong would tease Lu Yuan because Lu Yuan never really mentioned that his grandfather was Yuan Shikai. So when she knew about it, she would actually tease him and say, actually, my father was against your grandfather before. And so he died in 1916, and then Yuan Kewen was gotten his fair share. But then the day he died in 1930, he was only left with $20. Yuan Kewen, he actually spent it all. He was known for being an extremely amazing calligrapher, absolutely amazing. Most people, normal people like me, I do calligraphy, I write, on a desk, So how Yuan Kewen wrote is this. He would lie down, like half lie down. He would have one hand with his opium, and then he would take a brush, and he would actually get 2 people to pull the paper. And then he would write it like that. He would write it like that. Actually, the pulling paper thing, someone else had done that before. It's Wang Duo. Wang Duo, also a very famous calligrapher, but no one really lied down to write. And basically, people would pay him like $1,000. So one of the most colorful warlords, Zhang Zhongchang, would pay him $1,000, and so that you could buy probably like 5 apartments in Shanghai at the time just to write one piece. Zhang Zhongchang is known for the 3 ignorant, the 3 3 things he didn't know. He didn't know how much money he had, he didn't know how many soldiers he had, and he didn't know how many wives he had. So he was the 3 ignorant. And so the 3 ignorant would pay him a lot of money for his calligraphy. He was also, he would also sing, this is actually him, Kunqu. So Kunqu would be like a higher form, like I don't know much, but it's basically like the higher form of Chinese opera. So the reason why Beijing opera became much more famous was really because Empress Dowager liked it. But actually, if you look at the other Qing dynasty, like the more artistically inclined, for example, like Xianfeng Huangdi, or like or even earlier Cao Xueqin, like the family of the Dream of the Red Chamber, they would be into the Kunqu. So that's supposed to be the higher art form, and that's what Yuan Kewen was actually into. Again, that's where Wu Jianxiong came from. So I think it was actually quite a beautiful thing where Lu Yuan eventually married like someone from an area where his father was absolutely in love with the culture, and then he was one of the main. He actually one of the main book collectors in early Republican era. So he basically had the most collection, most number of collection of that is printed in the Song Dynasty. So Song Dynasty was the apex of Chinese culture, and basically that's what he was into. He was actually he collected a lot of those books. He collected a lot of stamps. He collected a lot of chops, and he basically used all his money for these collections. And he wrote prolifically from poetry to novels to even detective novels. And that's Yuan Kewen. He was also a triad member. He joined the Qingbang in 1912 already. And so he would be one generation above Big Ear Du, Dou Yuesheng. He would be about one generation above. So when he died, actually a lot of people came. So the main person like Xu Shichang, so Cui Saichang, his father's main confidant, president of China was there. Yu Ren, the minister of education was there. And then a bunch of monks and a bunch of geishas. Apparently more than 1,000 geishas came to his funeral. Absolutely amazing man. And then he died at 41. He died in 1930. So, and then Wu Jianxiong would meet Luke Yuan in America in 1936. So Luke Yuan would, basically he was left with no money. So even though he had all this, background, there wasn't really much going for him. So I think what is very interesting is that, Wu Jianxiong married to this family while she came from, the part of Suzhou that manufactured the most number of imperial scholars. And you could really see these two big forces, the bureaucracy of Imperial China and the transition from Imperial China, Republican China, all embodied in Wu Jianxiong. And it was through her physics that she actually transformed the world by being part of the Manhattan Project and also the parity experiments. So to that, I think I will leave for Q&A. So as long as it's not physics, I can. If it's Chinese history, I think I can handle. But yeah, thank you. Yeah.
That's the first question. Luke Yuan, what did he do for a living?
He was a physicist. So he was actually in Caltech. Yeah, he's Caltech. Yeah, so yeah. Mm-hmm.
And what happened to their kids?
I think that they have one kid who's also a physicist. Yeah, so yeah. But we don't know much anymore now. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Oh.
Yeah, the granddaughter is journalist with New York Post for a while, and then another a major American post.
Okay.
The reason why I know this is I'm from Taicang, where she's from.
Okay.
So it's such a surprise when I saw her name come up in Asia Society's newsletters.
Yeah.
Because in Taicang, he's a household name because the government does such good publicity. Mm-hmm. So it's there is school named after her, and when I was just looking up in internet, and then apparently May 31st was her 113th birthday, and there is a small exhibition held in my hometown, with artifacts and things.
Okay.
Yeah, and then they've always organized these things. Yeah. I remember the year when she passed away. That's 1997. I was still in high school. Yeah. And then we were asked to write essays and stories. Yeah. And my story was published in a local newspaper.
Oh, wow. Oh, very nice.
I just a little bit share. And to be more precise, she's from a town. There are three main towns in Taicang. Taicang is a county-level city within Suzhou. Yeah. And then there are three major towns in Taicang. And then she's from Liuhe, which is the town that is just by the Yangtze River. Okay. So it's actually one of the major a port along the Yangtze River because it's where this river meets the East Sea, and it's part of the big consortium of the Shanghai ports. Okay. Yeah. So historically, it's also quite important because Zheng He, the great Chinese sailor, started his sail also in that port. Yeah. And then her dad's school is still around.
Mingde, yeah. She's buried there, right? All her ashes are there.
Her ashes are there. Her ashes are there. Yeah, and there's still trees. There are trees called Wisterian trees, just next to the tomb.
Okay, interesting. Interesting.
So,
Yeah, hi. Now, it's not really a question. It's just I want to ask for your opinion. Maybe for you and also for you as well, since you're from her hometown. I'm just surprised her name, Jianxiong, so her parents, she was born in 1912, that's 100 years ago. And then that's even now, 21st century, I wouldn't name my daughter Jianxiong. Both Jian and Xiong are such masculine names. Yeah. So through your research, and also you're from the town, so anybody can explain like what they were thinking. The parents.
Oh, yeah, so
that's why.
And then basically, and so it's interesting where her father was like, yeah, we'll have you at like just like one of the boys. So you will follow the 尖字辈.
I see.
Yeah, and then Xiong, I think it's basically I think it was basically like one of the major attributes. So the 尖雄尖考, like that kind of.
Yeah, it just shocked me.
But I think it also reflects like her father's or her parents' expectations of her.
In a way, she's very lucky, I mean, from her accomplishments later on, you can see she's very intelligent.
Yeah, of course.
But without a family like that, I don't think she will.
So let's say if she was born in
right?
Qiuzhou, that would never happen.
She's really lucky.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Thank you for the fascinating talk. This is fascinating. And my question is about the Nobel Prize. So it's quite established that, is it quite established that she should be awarded?
Okay.
Is it true? Why she did not? And you want to go a bit into the controversy?
So, okay, so obviously everything that everything I read would be about commemorating her. So I think if something's written, it's most likely about why she should have gotten it, because I don't think anyone would want to say no, she doesn't deserve it, right? So I think so one thing, right? So before, like in earlier days, Nobel Prizes usually were given to the experimental physicists, and so if you look at the Nobel, the three of them, she was actually the experimental physicist, and she didn't get it, and so she was nominated that many times. And there were some people, at least there were enough credible people that said that she deserved it. So, but these things is always very difficult, right? I think what's interesting about Pauli, was that he actually predicted it. He said he had a dream, and he actually did a dream analysis with Cao Yong, and so he actually knew that she would not get it. So whatever it's worth. Yeah, but I think I can't speak for whether someone deserves a Nobel Prize and not getting it. I think a lot of people get Nobel Peace Prizes. Yeah, but yeah.
I just add that actually I think traditionally, now it's better, but traditionally, Nobel Prize practice against the female gender.
Yeah. In the 50s,
Watson, they won the Nobel Prize for discovering the structure of DNA, which is like laid foundation for genetic biology, right? But actually, the reason that they were able to discover the structure of the DNA is because another female scientist, Franklin, she was in a different lab. She did the X-ray. She found the structure. And somebody in Watson's lab, like somehow, I wouldn't call steal, but got the structure, looked at it without permission, and that's later on when they saw the structure, they figured out that it must be a double helix. But again, these two male scientists got the Nobel Prize, but the female didn't get. So I think it's very similar to her case. So I think that's why, but hopefully in the future that female scientists can get equal recognitions as the male scientists.
Hello.
Connecting to that, I think I know Marie Curie at first wasn't actually supposed to get the Nobel Prize. It was actually her husband that told the Nobel Prize committee that she also helped with the work, and then she got the Nobel Prize.
Okay.
And two, this is the question, was Wu Jianxiong connected or acquainted with Qian Xuesen?
Oh. Must be, right? But I don't know enough to answer you intelligent enough. If anybody else knows, yeah. If anybody else knows, I think there must be in terms of, I just know from common sense that, Chinese American scientists, there was a lot of interaction, especially in the STEM field in America. But I can't answer you like intelligently about the details. Yeah, because actually it's relatively, I think one of the reasons is because it's relatively sensitive. Because Qian Shen actually went back to China to create the atomic bomb in the early 60s. And then so she stayed in America. She was an American citizen, and she didn't go back until 1973. So after America and China built relations again, after the Nixon visit, I think even if there was, we wouldn't. This is actually the great thing about history, if you're ever interested in history, which is whatever you read is most likely not going to be true. So and you will actually need to do a lot of digging to find out. So actually, that's a great question, because I think it's not obvious to find out, because it would have been very dangerous for both parties, because China and America at the time were not very friendly with each other. Actually, maybe a little bit like now, but yeah. Yeah.
Hi. To add to your point about Wu Jianxiong had not returned to China until 1973, and also to the lady who's originally from Taicang. So last year I went back to Taicang for the first time, because my grandfather, 外公, is actually from Jiangsu Taicang.
Oh, wow, okay.
And he was in fact a neighbor of Wu Jianxiong growing up.
Oh, wow.
But he later on emigrated to California.
Okay.
But before that, he after the Second World War, because he was with Kuomintang, like the Republic Party, he had moved from I think Chongqing to Taipei. Yeah. And from what my mom told me, when Wu Jianxiong went back to Taiwan to visit, Zhang Jingguo at the time asked my grandfather to go to the airport to pick her up, and they would have sort of catch-up dinners in the family home.
Oh, wow. Okay.
But I didn't ask my mom at the time when we were visiting what year this would have been, because it was probably before my mom was born, which was 1957. So
but she went back to Taiwan regularly, though.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So she went to Taiwan regularly. It's only mainland China that she went back, because her dad died in 58, her mom died in 62. So
did she have a connection with the Kuomintang in any?
Yeah. So she would have been quite active actually in the Taiwan side, right? In the Republic of in Zhonghua Minguo. Yeah, she was actually openly critical of some of the policies of Jiang Jieshi in terms of actually there was one dissident that was arrested. And then it was her being outspoken about it. That's why he was released. I think it was 69 or something like that. So she was actually quite active. But I have, relatively avoided any kind of political issue. By political, I went up to 1930. It was on purpose. So yeah. Anyone want to talk about politics pre-1930? Oh, actually, I prefer 1916. Actually, yeah. Huh? No, because it's that's when Yuan Shikai died. Yuan Shikai. So her grandfather-in-law, because that 1916 basically meant the end of like imperial China. Because the Yuan Shikai years actually is an extension of the Qing dynasty, at least the Qing dynasty system. After 1916, after Yuan Shikai died, it completely broke down. Yeah.
So maybe let's talk about politics post-1930.
Post-1930?
But let's limit it to American politics.
Okay, sure.
So I would love to find out from you if there was any writing from Wu Jianxiong or others about what kind of obstacles she had to overcome or challenges she had to face being a Chinese American in STEM in America during that time. Yeah.
Well, a lot of what actually her life is about the obstacles, right? So she couldn't get to Michigan because basically she preferred Berkeley because Michigan she couldn't go through the first front door. So that's because she's a woman. And then after she and Luke Yuan graduated. They couldn't really get a job at Berkeley, and so she couldn't be a professor. She could only be a postdoc, and then she was able to get a teaching job in Smith, but she wasn't allowed to do research. So it wasn't until Lawrence helped her she could then be teaching and doing some research in Princeton. So it wasn't until when the Manhattan Project, when they couldn't solve a problem, that's when they called upon. Then they was thinking, oh, there was this Chinese girl that was able to do so, and then actually when she actually graduated, the Oakland newspaper actually wrote, when you look at her, she actually, I don't have a picture of her younger, but she was like, she looks more like an actress or the wife of a wealthy man or something like that than a physicist, right? So it's a lot of this kind of stigma going on. So, but a lot of it, I actually don't know if it's Asian American or if she's a woman, but so her whole life, including at least not getting a Nobel Prize, and all that. I think her whole life was about that. She was still underpaid by the 1970s. Yeah, so I think her whole life is about the difficulty of being a minority and a woman. Yeah. So.
Was she the only? Hello. Thank you for the talk. Was she the only Asian on the Manhattan Project? Can you tell us a little bit about the project, like how many scientists were involved? And approximately, like, what year did she join the project?
She joined late 1944. So what's interesting is that she actually was hesitant to publish her work because she was scared that it might be used by other countries for the atomic bomb. So it wasn't until when Fermi and Sergei went to her, that's when she actually disclosed the information, and that was part of it. So late 1944. I don't think there were any other Asians. I think there were 100 or so. You probably know better. Do you know? 100 or so? Scientists. But I know I think she was definitely in terms of scientists, I think she was definitely the basically only woman and basically the only Asian. Yeah.
Fascinating. Can I ask what drives your interest in her? And then are you doing further research? What's inadequate in the literature about her life and the context and all that?
I'm actually more interested in Yuan Shikai. I'm actually fascinated with the Yuan Shikai family because like how he rose to power, and because he was the transition from imperial China to republican China, and then when he died, it was the warlord period. So I'm actually more fascinated with Yuan Shikai. But Wu Jianxiong, I think she's interesting again where she came from. That's why I actually directed my description of her with I'm interested in the imperial examination system and the geographical and also the socioeconomic clustering of the scholars and how that actually affected and shaped Qing governance. So my main field of research is in how the Qing government actually ran the country and maintained control for 268 years. So that's actually my research. So that's why actually the imperial examination system and Yuan Shikai, which is the end of it, those two areas I'm actually much more interested in.
So this is a spin-off.
Yeah. It's an important spin-off because these two forces actually, if you think about it, if you talk about a Chinese person that really shaped the world, was really her. I'm not talking about she's a woman or she's a man, doesn't matter. She was the person that was the only Chinese person in charge, being an instrumental part of the Manhattan Project, being an instrumental part in defeating the Japanese. So it's not really about the gender. I just think that she's absolutely fascinating and she's an amazing woman, and how it's she's so petite and all that, but then it's with her brain, she's able to create this weapon that, that actually brought about peace for China. Right.
But her critical role in that, was it recognized and written up in the literature?
So she
or
was.
Is it your interpretation?
You
see it, right?
Yeah. So she was the woman of the year 1945. So I think that mattered. So that was before it was person of the year. She was so there was man of the year, and then there's some women of the year, and so she was woman of the year 1945. And then she, my understanding from my research saying that they were stuck in the uranium enrichment side of things, and then she came along, she did the experiment, she fixed it, and then it happened. So I think I'm pretty sure she was instrumental. Yeah. So yeah. Please.
was the wait. Did you get interested in the Yuanshi story after you did some research on Wu Jianxiong or before?
Before, because Yuan Shikai is like kind of like the most important person in the transition from the Qing to Republican. Yeah, so he basically ended Imperial China. Some say Sun Yat-sen, but then he actually forced the abdication of the Qing court. Yeah.
And to get back to your question about the connection between Wu and Qian Xuesen,
yeah.
just based on a quick Google search,
Okay,
apparently
yeah.
BBC reported that Qian Xuesen was the photographer at her wedding with.
Okay, really?
At a wedding in 1942 in
Okay, 42.
Caltech.
Yeah,
in
yeah,
Caltech. So he made a little film actually of the wedding.
Okay, so they must have been good friends.
8mm film. Yeah.
Okay. Would have been very dangerous for them to, like, if he was also in the video, would have been very dangerous for them to still be in America in the late 50s when Qian Xuesen actually went back to China, right? Yeah. They're all connected, right? Yeah, it had to be, yeah. Yeah.
Thank you very much for the talk. It's quite inspiring. One question that is quite interesting to me is that have you ever studied what is the motivation behind Wu Jianxiong's quite of the strong wish to go back to China? Because Wu Jianxiong left the Imperial China, but Wu Jianxiong could only come back to the PRC, to the People's Republic of China. So what was the motivation behind why she was so insist? And I'm also quite curious on whether this kind of the wish is also shared by her husband, Luke Yuan. Did Luke Yuan come back to China in a way?
Much less so, I think. I think it was her who came back, and she was buried here. I'm buried in Suzhou. She didn't really come back until like 1973. Yeah, so she couldn't because she became an American citizen in the 50s, and so even when so she couldn't go back to her parents' funeral, like her dad or her mom's funeral, because especially someone with a strategic an asset in her brain as her, she wasn't allowed to go back. Not until the 70s. Yeah. But she didn't, unlike Yang Zhenling, she did not participate in any kind of research or anything. As far as I know, I don't think she was. She wasn't part of anything official in China. Yeah. Okay. Great questions. Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah. Thank you. Thank
you so much for tonight's program. I did also, while we had the advertisement for this program, quite a few friends email me. They had a Colombian connection. They were Colombia, and they remember spending Thanksgiving with her. She is, I think, like Ian said, spent her time, I think quite a lot of her time in Colombia. So she was a known professor and very much involved with the Chinese community in New York, the Chinese American community. And as I recall, you mentioned Hu Shi. I think next year, China Institute is going to celebrate its 100th anniversary, which was Hu Shi was founded, China Institute was founded by Hu Shi. So I think that Chinese American community, my understanding when I arrived in 2003, was still quite tight. Even though she had already passed away, she was revered very much by the not only the Committee 100 member, but the diaspora community, whether you're from China or from Taiwan or Chinese American. So I think her role, and I think later on, my understanding, the stamps. I think each country came out with stamp commemorating her, whether it's in the U.S. or China. So I think her role is recognized. And so, but I'm still pitching for somebody to do a biopic. So here in Hong Kong, we are famous for our film industry, and I really do think somebody, not only as a woman, or as a Chinese American woman, but her time period, kind of like what Ian said, it just, in that time period, her contribution is kind of maybe underlooked, and unlike, kind of really similar to our exhibition, I have to say I did not know who He Mo-chun was until we did our exhibition, and you look at her work and her contribution. So I think, future filmmakers out there, anybody who might be interested, or even a documentary would be really fascinating because of her her span in history. So thank you all for being here. There are going to be more programs like this. Although it's the summer, we have plenty of programs this summer, including tomorrow night. I know it's sold out, but I think if you're on waiting list, we can get you in. We're going to celebrate American music. We're going to celebrate. We need celebrations these days. We're going to have some wonderful musician from Hawaii here tomorrow night at Asia Society, and so please join us, and young people as well as people who are a bit older. Please join us as our member, and we look forward to welcoming you to future programs. So good night. Thank you.